Hey there, educator. Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Lanisha, and I'm all about helping educators make meaningful connections in math instruction. If you've ever attended one of my live professional development sessions, then you know how truly passionate I am about this teacher life. PD for the Soul is my space for providing professional development on the go, where you can take what you need and place the rest on the shelf for another day. New episodes drop every Sunday at 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. This is where we will dive into strategies, routines, and insights to help students build deeper understanding. And here's something new. Our monthly newsletter launches on March 1st. This will be your go-to spot for links to all resources we discuss on the podcast. I want you to have everything in one place. Plus, I'll share the books that will shape upcoming solo episodes in case you want to read along. But that's not all. The newsletter will also explore connections across domains and grade levels, because when we keep those connections at the core of our instruction, we give students the tools to make generalizations that make new concepts more accessible. So, hit subscribe, stay connected, and let's make math happen. See you in the episode. Welcome back to PD for the Soul. Today, we're tackling one of the most pressing challenges in education, bridging academic gaps. Today, we are talking with Dr. Lamb about strategies for equity and engagement. Whether it's addressing skill level gaps, implementing culturally relevant practices, or managing large class sizes, we've got actionable insights for you. Joining us is an educator who has made it their mission to bridge these gaps while keeping students engaged and on track. Welcome, Dr. Lamb.
Hi, thank you, Lanisha. Thank you for having me. I really do appreciate it. I am now the founder and lead consultant of Education Empowerment, a consulting firm. I provide customized consulting and professional development to pre-K to 8th grade new teachers with 0 to 5 years of experience and helping them to bridge that gap to become culturally relevant, differentiated teachers. And this is specifically for new teacher, general education, math teachers. I am a former classroom teacher with 21 years of experience. I've taught all grades from pre-K to 12th grade. During my 21 years of experience in public education, I've had various roles such as special education teacher, teaching math in a resource room and in an inclusion classroom. So I've taught all students the so-called general ed, special education, ESL, multiple disabilities when I worked at private schools. Also different roles was math curriculum writer for the early grades, graduation project teacher, high school counselor, behavior specialist, and also family and community engagement coordinator. So a little bit about education empowerment. I started education empowerment for a couple of reasons, but the main reasons is because I wanted to acknowledge and amplify teachers' voices, especially teachers who look like me. Another reason why I started education empowerment is for new teachers to have ongoing and meaningful professional development. Right now, there's a big push for recruiting teachers, but you can't recruit teachers until you find a way to retain the teachers that you have. Because if you continuously do this, we're going to continue to have this revolving door of many teachers leaving because they're not getting what they need. And they need the training, they need the support, they need the professional development. That 4 years of schooling that they invested in, that's not enough to keep them in the classroom because they're stepping into real life experience dealing with these kids and a whole number of other issues as well.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for giving us a little bit about yourself, your experience, as well as your business. Before we started recording, you shared that you are celebrating your 1 year anniversary. So congratulations on that. We are excited to be able to dive deep into some of the things that you have done and how we can really support teachers as they are moving forward. One thing that you shared that I truly believe in is that the teachers need professional development. The challenge is that there's a lot of energy going around on these internet streets and people are not excited about professional development. So one of the things that I want to do here is provide people with something they can use immediately, something that is not difficult or overwhelming, but things that they really can take into their classroom and put to use and they can see some type of accelerated outcome, some type of benefit for themselves and their students. So I'm super excited for us to get into this conversation tonight because I think you definitely have something to share with our listeners. So we're going to jump right on into our first question. So how do you identify and address skill level gaps among students while still keeping them engaged with that grade level content?
Building relationships with students. My question is, are you having conversations with your students? Or are you just planning things for them to do without their input? That's a question that I pose for teachers. We make decisions about students without involving students. But we keep doing it and it doesn't work. And what we need to do is start to build those relationships with students. That's key for increasing student achievement and individual student success. When we're talking about bridging those skills, once you have those conversations with those students, if there's gaps, when you have conversations and building those relationships, do those students even know the gaps that they have? Because most of the time, I know when I was a classroom teacher, they don't know the gaps. So you have to have those conversations. Students should be having data folders. Students should know their data. Everything is so focused on teachers need to know data. We do need to know the data, but also the students need to know the data because they need to know what path they need to take in order to get to reach the grade level content. So when we're talking about engagement, when you're building those relationships and the students see, they hear, and they know that the adult who is teaching them is interested not only in their learning, but interested in them as a whole child. That's where the engagement comes in. You can't just go in the classroom, open up a book, and expect for kids to be engaged. It doesn't work like that. It haven't been working like that. So we have to change what we're doing in order to meet their needs.
A couple things that I wrote down in listening to your response is we have to get the student input. As we are on this path to proficiency, it isn't all about just what the teacher is doing and the teacher's goals. We have to make sure we're inviting the students into that learning and making sure that they have some onus in that as well. You mentioned having data folders, making sure that students are aware of where we want them to be and where they are in relation to that is super important. And then making sure that we're building those relationships with students. So now they're open to building alongside us as their teacher as well. And then one thing that you said that I think is incredibly powerful is being interested in the whole child. Everything that this child has going on with them, having a level of interest. So again, that they're open to learning from you. You know, people talk a lot about students who, if they don't like the teacher, they certain things that they ain't willing to do because they don't like the teacher. People might not think that it's a big deal to be liked by your students, but that level of respect really goes a long way. Now, when we're talking about identifying and addressing those skill level gaps, are there any particular programs that you like to use? Are there any things that you usually suggest that teachers use to identify and address those gaps?
Yes, I do want to say teachers need to realize that if that student does not like you, or if there's a clash for whatever reason, you're not going to get that engagement. You're not going to get that input. That student is not going to succeed in that room. So I do want to point that out. What has worked for me and what I've seen work for other teachers, that there's no one size fits all. So you have to use a multiple of things for whatever you find out what's going to meet their needs. So that's where the differentiation instruction comes in at. And that's not necessarily saying I need to have 20 different lesson plans for each of my 20 kids. That's not what it is. So you definitely need a variety of strategies for what you need to do for your different kids. Some of those strategies are going to work for most, but you have to figure out a couple that's going to work for particular individuals who those other strategies don't meet. So when I'm talking about small group instruction, I'm talking about independent learning as far as what are they doing on their own to track their own progress? Are they using some type of iExcel or Khan Academy or Study Allen, something that is not particularly with the teacher one-on-one, or are they working in pairs? There has to be other avenues that you need to include in your classroom.
One thing I'm glad that you mentioned, or you emphasized the importance of that student-teacher relationship. And while you were talking, I pulled up John Hattie. I like to reference him and his research a lot on the podcast. He talks about that effect size, and anything that's over that 4/10. If it's equal to 4/10, that is the equivalent of what could happen in the course of a year. So ideally, we would want to grow a child 1 year in the course of a year. And then anything beyond that, we start to accelerate those student outcomes. So I went to pull up those 250 plus influences on student achievement because I wanted to see where the teacher-student relationship ranked, and it is at 0.52. So that's clearly above our 4/10. So that relationship really does have a positive impact on those student outcomes. So I just wanted to throw that back in there, and I appreciate you for emphasizing that. So now when we're thinking about strategies or tools that we use to differentiate this instruction, how can we do this in a way that is manageable for teachers? Before you answer, today I was working with my teachers because we just finished our second benchmark. We just did our data dives. They got this data back. We're looking at how students are performing, and we're thinking about all of these different needs that the students have. And how do we manage all these needs in addition to the tier one instruction that we're still responsible for providing for the new content that's still left for us to teach? So it's a lot of things to manage. So I'm excited to hear about the strategies and tools that you have to share with us on how we can make this manageable.
As a teacher, I struggle with that too. And I know a lot of my teachers I work with struggle with that. So the strategies and tools that I started using later in my career and I had some time to reflect on is number one, consistency. Whatever that is working and it is benefiting the students in your classroom, you have to be consistent and keep doing what is working. The second one is the environment. So it's a way to differentiate instruction, but you do it in steps that are manageable. I know as a teacher and many teachers, we like to get into the classroom and we like to do everything at one time and think we can do it all. We cannot do that. So the consistency, the environment. I know as teaching math, it was a double block period, math and reading. So I'm in a classroom with students between 90 minutes and 103 minutes. I want to let you know as a teacher and teachers out there, whole group instruction for 90 minutes to 103 minutes is not an option. So how are you differentiating your environment? I'm not saying that you cannot never do whole group instruction because there's sometimes you have to do whole group instruction and it benefits and you get your content across. But also you got to do small group instruction. You have to do independent. You have to do pairs. Third would be the content. So after you are consistent, have your environment, classroom environment together, the content. Now you can get your content across. And that goes back to the teacher can be with each student every minute of the class period. So that goes back to, do students know their gap? Do students know their data? They have to work independently. They're getting that feedback from whatever math program that they're on. As I mentioned, IXL and Mentum, Study Island, and Khan Academy. They have to be able to track their own progress. You have to have some type of small group instruction, learning stations. I know when I taught middle school, I use task card stations a lot. There has to be independent or a small group with the teacher or a small group with students on open-ended questions, reading with open-ended questions, reading vocabulary comprehension. And this is a big misconception, even with math teachers out there who think, well, you don't have to read in math. That's a big misconception. Sometimes our students are not low in math. They may score low because they don't know how to read and comprehend the problem. So of course they're not going to be able to solve the problem if they can't read, comprehend, and define words in the problem. So when we're talking about math, and I've always done this, there is a reading component. And that is what's missing in math classes because students have been conditioned to go to school and only read in that reading class or they call it English language arts. That's the only time students read, and we're doing students a disservice. They should be reading in each class. I don't care if it's art, science, gym health, they should be reading, comprehending, and using vocabulary everywhere they go.
I want to echo the whole reading with open-ended questions again, and I'm reminded of the fact that we just had our benchmarks again, and we're looking at the data and we're noticing how the gridded response questions are the ones that students typically struggle with. So this comes to mind as you talk about reading with open-ended questions, because the students who have multiple choice questions now have an opportunity to get it correct. But when those choices are then removed, now it's all on you. So what you got, and so they're left to rely on those reading comprehension skills. And I'm always telling teachers, we got to do things like 3 reads, where we having students to understand what the problem's about, what's countable, measurable, thinking about a strategy. If we're not doing that regularly, then when kids are on their own, they're not going to do it, and then they're going to be stuck. So I love the fact that you talked about reading with open-ended questions, because students need to be in the habit of being able to read and comprehend that text and determine what moves they need to make on their pathway to solving. Now, you mentioned small group instruction. That's your thing. That's something that I know, looking at your website, that you've had success with. Now, how did you balance, or how do you coach teachers to balance that small group work with other instructional formats in the classroom?
I do believe in small group instruction. I know a lot of teachers don't. And I know because, like I said, as teachers, we just want to go in there and we just want to teach, and we want to do our own thing. And that needs to stop, because we have to involve kids and or planning and teaching and learning. And the reason why I think teachers may be opposed to it or don't like it, because again, it's about consistency, and it's going to take time to teach kids how to, one, interact with each other before a teacher can go in there and open up the book and start teaching about the content. And that's what we as teachers struggle with. That's what we just want to do. We just want to go in there to do our own thing, but that's not meeting their needs. I mentioned the 90 to 103 period of math. What do you think children are going to do for 90 minutes to 103 minutes? Because if you think they're going to sit down for 90 minutes and just listen to what you say and write down some answers and everything's going to be good, then you're in the wrong profession. We have to start, first of all, thinking about and doing what's best for students. By the time kids start in August and September, all the way through June, you're teaching those routines, procedures, expectations. You're doing it every day. And that's one of my pet peeves that I have for teachers at the beginning of the school year, is they spend 3 weeks, 3 whole weeks, some teachers, not all teachers, they spend 3 whole weeks not doing content. They call it getting to know students, but it's not really teaching, and kids are sitting there and it's just no instruction. It's no instruction, it's no community building, it's no classroom culture. And then after the 3 weeks, teachers, we want to dig into the content. But wait a minute, students don't know the procedures, the routines, the consequences, and the expectations. So when we talk about small group instructions, there's probably 3 or 4 small groups in the classroom. First of all, the students have to know what is going on in each small group. Number 2, how do we transition to each group? How and when do we transition to each group? Number 3, how do I interact in my small group with my peers? These are all things that have to be taught through the whole school year when you're doing teaching and learning with students, not just those first 3 weeks. And then as the year goes on, I know when October hits, teachers are complaining that kids are not following the rules, and there's a lot of behavior management because we never set the conditions and the expectations for them to meet the needs.
I'm making my notes as you're talking. I'm thinking about what you said about small groups. There may be 3 to 4 small groups that are taking place at any given time. And in the process of that, students need to know what's going on in that small group. They need to know how they're transitioning from one group to the next. They need to know when they're transitioning from one group to the next. And something that I wrote down and underlined several times, because we've been talking about this a lot, is those routines, procedures, and expectations. So if we're not taking the time at the beginning of the year to teach those routines, to teach the behavior, to practice the behavior, then we can't really become upset when the students don't exhibit the behavior.
Yes.
So I think that is a critical point that you made about we just have to, whatever those expectations are, we have to inspect them. So you gotta put it out there, practice it, and then hold them accountable for doing those things on a regular basis. And like you said, I think a lot of times we think we can show a middle schooler something one time and they supposed to just get it and be ready to roll when you ready to roll. No, it does not work like that. It doesn't work like that.
Not in middle school. It don't work in elementary and high school either. But I'm telling you, if you teach in middle school, no, that's not going to work. And I know teachers, some of them may say, well, I did this a whole week and it's not working. Really? A week? That's not consistent. And students have been conditioned, they know how to go against what is different for them. Because what you're doing in your class, all of the other 5, 6 teachers aren't doing. So if they come in here and have some opposition of what you're trying to do, they could give you a hard time because they know you're just going to go back. Oh, I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm just going to do whole group instruction. They can just get a piece of paper and write down the answers. Then that's how we get students getting passed on to the next grade. You have to be consistent. A whole week is not consistent. Consistent is from August, September to June.
100%. 100%. We have to understand that kids in middle school are in a very weird place of development, just with all the things that are changing within themselves, figuring out who they are. And then if you add on top of that things that could be going on at home or things just going on with their peers, it's a lot for anybody to deal with, let alone a teenager.
Yes.
So we really have to be intentional about the things that we want to see in our classroom, the way that we teach it, and the way that we are holding the students accountable for living up to that expectation. So now we know that our class sizes these days have gotten much larger, with people kind of migrating away from the field, and we have new folks coming in, but obviously there's a learning curve. And through all of that, again, those class sizes are larger. So you mentioned earlier how important it is to build relationships. And we talked about John Hattie's effect size on that student-teacher relationship. Thinking about how the large class sizes affect building relationships and tailoring instruction. How do you prioritize relationship building in those large classrooms?
I'm going to answer that question, but I'm glad you pointed out students are not coming into your classroom geeked up and excited about that lesson plan that you done planned the night before or 2 weeks before. I know we as teachers, we get in that room and we have it in our head. We're going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, and we're going to do our outline of our lesson plan and we're ready to go. Especially middle school students, what are they thinking about? They're thinking about what their peers is doing now, social media, especially that middle school. That's a lot of they're trying to figure out who they are. They don't know who they are. It's a lot of developmental changes. So that's really a critical information that our teachers need to realize that when they walk into the classroom, they're not thinking about your lesson plan. And that's something I had to deal with too as a teacher. And that comes back to in any class size, not just small class size or large class size, it comes back to that relationship. I know as teachers, we get overwhelmed because we got all these kids and we want to teach the content and we want to, have them do this. We want to have them do many things. They're doing things, right? Doing things mean nothing to me. Are you learning and comprehending and mastering the content? That's what matters to me. I don't care about what you're doing, how many tests that you're doing. I care about if you're learning, if you're mastering, and if you're understanding what is being taught. So small class size or large class size, you teachers, you have to build those relationships. The relationships is key. And there's different ways you can do that. What are students doing? What is the procedure and the routine when the students first come into the classroom? I know for me, it was a warm up. Some people call it do now. What exactly is the do now? What exactly is the warm up? Because I know when I taught middle school, some of my warm ups were getting to know you activities. And then after the next day, I would write feedback on the paper because the kids think that you really don't read what they are writing or read their work, and then they don't expect the feedback. So when they get the feedback the next day, and like I said, being consistent, when they keep getting feedback, they're like, oh, she's really going to read this. I guess I got to do this. Then they start just writing stuff because they know you're going to read it. It's consistency. It's actually following up and giving that feedback. So you're getting to know your students. And then at the same time, when you have those conversations, your students are getting to know you. And even if the students think that teachers are old these days and they really have nothing in common, once they have those conversations, they realize, oh, we have some things in common and we can actually talk about some things that may or may not be related to the specific content. And that's how you're building the relationship. So also, besides those particular warm-ups that may not always be content related, how are you getting feedback from your students? Other than warm-ups and exit slips, are you surveying your students? Are you having open discussions about what the students need from you? Not only what you think you need to teach from the book, you have to get some type of feedback. And I know as teachers, we have a lot on our plate as teachers, and you want to do everything at one time. And that's something we have to get out of our head. We have to get out of our head that we have to do everything at one time, because we don't. And when you put that pressure on yourself, it turns to burnout. Then when it turns to burnout, we can have many teachers leaving or just giving up. We cannot do everything at one time. So you got to give yourself some grace.
So one thing that is standing out to me is your feedback drives the student's performance. So you mentioned how we can leverage that warm up, that do now, that bell ring, or whatever you call it, as a way to do a check-in with students and providing them the feedback, whether in writing or however you choose to do so, them seeing that you're actually going to read it and you're actually going to respond is going to help encourage them to complete those tasks. And now you're learning more about them. You're building a relationship because you're providing that feedback. They're continuing those assignments. So you're building a relationship, even though your class size might be large. Another thing that I wrote down that you said was completing tasks versus understanding content.
Yes.
Mic drop. So completing tasks means nothing if the babies do not understand what they are doing. So
Yes.
again, completing tasks means nothing. Yes, you checked the box. Yes, you have completed some things, but do they understand it?
Right.
That's the thing. That's the thing.
And that's why we're seeing these low scores in many classrooms, not just math. Students, like I said earlier, students been conditioned. They know how to play the game of school. You go into the room, you get your piece of paper, your worksheet, because we don't worksheet it students to death. You get your worksheet. It's either A, B, C, or D. And if it's fill in the blank, I'm gonna get the answer from my friend or the kid sitting 2 seats down from me. I'm gonna turn it in and I'm gonna get my 10 points. That's doing tasks. They know how to play the game of school. So there's a difference between school and there's a difference between education. We got to start focusing on education.
In all of this, teachers can get overwhelmed. You mentioned that. You said that teachers have to understand that they are human, that you are not Captain America out here able to do all the things under the sun. You have to give yourself some grace. So I want to know, I want to dig a little bit deeper on that, because I know there's going to be a teacher that tunes in who is probably going to be overwhelmed, who's stressed out, who's trying to juggle all the things. Several tasks are open in their brain all the time. Now, how do they handle these demands of addressing equity, but also delivering academic rigor? How do we do that?
So we have to start thinking about, what do we need to not only to survive in our education space, but to thrive. And some advice that I have for teachers, I know, yes, they're overwhelmed, too many demands on teachers, and we're addressing equity, and we're trying to deliver academic rigor. And this word rigor became a buzzword a couple years ago. I'm not really sure if people, administrators, teachers even know what rigor is, and everybody has a different definition of rigor. But what I consider rigor may not be the same of what someone else considers rigor. So when I'm discussing addressing equity and teaching and learning, is giving students what they need. So if you're not addressing equity, then you are not meeting students' learning needs. It's not two separate things. So whatever they need is rigor for them. If you're not meeting students' learning needs, then you're not addressing the equity. You're not meeting the needs. How is it rigor for them?
That's a good question. How is it rigorous for them if we're not meeting their needs? Okay, that's something to think about. Now, I know you did a project. You had a project, a mile in my shoes project. And I want you to share more about that project. And I want to talk about how the activities like this connect academic achievement in your classroom.
Yeah, so what I started doing with my middle school students, particularly eighth grade, is a lot of relationship building and getting to know you activities. Because when I started thinking about the content and the skills that they needed to learn, and I started to connect, okay, well, how can I connect this to what they already know, or what they already told me about in the conversations or the assignments that they already had. So I walk a mile in my shoes. I had got this activity from another teacher. And what I did is I tried to expand it through the whole school year. And I wanted to, it incorporated art, writing, and reading. And I know my students in particular, they love shoes and they like to draw, and they, like to still like to color. This is middle school, they're kids. Stop treating our kids like they're grown people, they're kids. So throughout the year, they're picking their favorite shoes, or they're creating their favorite shoes. They're designing them, coloring them, whatever. But they have to either answer the question, they pick the questions what they want to answer, or they can make up their own questions that they're going to answer in order for me to get to know them, and for their other students to get to know them. So it's not just between me and that student, it's between all of us as a classroom community. Like, we're our own community. So we get to learn from each other. And not only are the students doing it, I'm doing it as well. So we all get to know about each other. And the students put the artifacts on the wall, they decorate the wall. This is not my classroom, this is our classroom. So that goes back to behavior and management. Kids aren't going to destroy what they created on the wall. I'm not spending 2 weeks creating the classroom decorations. You're going to do it. This is our classroom. So they're not going to mess up and destroy that because you did it. So just going back to that. And so it's not just those 3 weeks of school where I know I've seen teachers not do anything at all. It's throughout the school year. And I've also done other activities and team building activities, such as getting to know you. It's called four corners. I usually do this as a warm up. So students come in, you ask them different questions. Like, for example, I learned Best Buy, and they pick an answer and they go to the different four corners. They don't know that I'm collecting data on them. So I can use that for my planning for what they need. Also, team building, I know as a whole class, we did rock, paper, scissors competition. I don't know if you ever done that with the whole class before. So that's just team building, something that may not be directly connected to math, but then after you get to know the students, you connect it back to whatever data that you collected about students. As far as increasing academic achievement, I relate that with student engagement. If there's no engagement, they're not going to have no individual academic achievement. And it takes time, and you have to be consistent for the whole 10 months. And I know that's what I did have a problem with it too. I know that's what teachers have a problem with.
Yeah. I think sometimes we feel the pressures of pacing and we just want to get things done, and we are sacrificing things that are critically important. And
Yes.
then you get to just before spring break and you're wondering, what in the world have I done? What has happened? And you about to pull your hair out. So yes, I completely get it. I completely get it.
Yes.
So now I'm interested to know though, when we're thinking about culturally relevant teaching, because when I'm hearing you talk about the things that you're doing with Walk a Mile in My Shoes, Four Corners, all these different activities, you are truly engaging with the whole child. You're learning more about them. Like you said, you're collecting data, and then you're going to use that to support them at some point in the future, right? So how do we use, or how do we ensure that culturally relevant teaching isn't something that just stays in the
Mm-hmm.
realm of building relationships? How can we
Mm-hmm.
now leverage that to help us achieve measurable academic success?
And culturally relevant teaching and learning, it always going to involve relationships, engaging with the students, taking ownership of their learning. So that's the extra piece that I want to point out, because that's a piece that's missing, is that we have to hold ourselves accountable as teachers, but also hold students accountable for taking ownership of their learning. Because right now the ownership is only on teachers, that teachers have to do everything. Like I said before, we're human and it can't be all on us. But there can't be any increase in academic success for students when the demands, the ownership, and expectations are solely placed on the teachers versus the students. Culturally relevant teaching is a connection to what students are learning. So it goes back to communicating with students, having conversations with students, because they want to know, why am I learning this and what is this for? And students need to see value. That's what we're missing. Just opening up a book and teaching equations or Pythagorean theorem, why they're thinking, what is this? Why do I need to know this? And how is this connected?
So one thing that I talk a lot with teachers about is making sure that students know the goal for today, like
Mm,
making sure it's not something that is on your board for administration. This is something for your community that you're building in your classroom. You want them
yeah,
to know where it is that we're going, so that on your pathway there, they can kind of check in with themselves on whether or not I'm on track. Like if I'm able to do some of the things that my teacher has modeled, then I know that I am on track. And if I can't, then I know I must have some questions somewhere. So just
yeah,
inviting them in, and then obviously if we created that safe space, then students are going to feel comfortable asking those questions. And you said if there's no engagement, there is no academic achievement. That's
no,
another mic drop. So we got to understand that if students are not engaged, if the
mm-mm,
students are not participating, if the students are not, if they don't have habits of evidence of their learning, then there is no measurable success,
right.
because it's not happening. So this entire conversation today, we've just been talking about bridging those gaps. So I want us to think about something that you would want all teachers to know about closing gaps for historically marginalized student groups. What's one thing you would want them to know?
I don't know if I could just do one thing, but I know what I know that works because I was a teacher and I know I've been there, elementary, middle, and high school. Closing the gaps, you have to get to know your students. You have to build those relationships. If you go in the classroom talking about that specific content and that only, it's not going to work for you, and it's not going to work for your students. These are kids. Kids want to be seen and they want to be heard. They always got something to say. So relationships matter the whole entire school year. That's what I'm emphasizing. It's not just August and September. It's August, September through June. You're doing that throughout the whole school year. It's not what you teach, but it's rather, okay, how you teach it. How are you teaching it? Okay. And making it relevant to them. Because teaching is not just, it's not about you. It's about what they need. The closing the gap is not about you. It's about what they need. Get to know what they need. You're going to have some conversations. There's a difference between teaching and conversations.
Wow. So one of the notes that I wrote down here is closing gaps isn't just about content. So I just need for us to allow that to resonate in our spirit. Because I think a lot of times when we are thinking about, oh, kids have unfinished learning, kids are behind, this kid is on this grade level, this kid has this projected proficiency rate, you're thinking about content. But as you just said, we cannot go into that classroom and think that we're just going to focus on the content, because students want to be seen and students want to be heard. So a relationship must exist. So we got to have the relationship so that we can get the engagement, so that we can get the academic achievement.
Yes.
Okay, Dr. Lamb.
Like
okay, Dr. Lamb, with that equation. Okay. I got to write that out.
How you put that.
I like it. Okay, so I know that your focus within your organization is on those pre-K through 8th grade new teachers. So I want us to think for a moment about them, because we know all teachers right now are really in the trenches. We all out here suffering.
Yes.
But right now, I want us to zone in on that first year teacher who's feeling unprepared, and they are trying to meet these diverse needs of their students. What are you going to tell them?
First of all, go back to your why. Go back to your why. Think about it, write it down, because there's a reason why you're there. That's number one. Feeling unprepared as a new teacher is called normal. During my 10th, 15th, and 20th year of teaching, I was unprepared and probably not sure what I was doing. Because like I said before, we are expected to know it all and do it all. It's other people putting the unrealistic expectations on us. And now we're thinking as teachers, we got to meet those expectations. You don't. Stop trying to meet other people's expectations. And I'm going to go back into the classroom. This is number 3, get to know your students, those informal assessments. And for number 4, find another educator, not just any educator or teacher. Find another like-minded educator who has the same goals and aspirations and high expectations for students. It can be a coach, mentor, or a colleague, or a support group for teachers that have a similar mindset for educating students, for feedback and guidance. This is one reason why I focus on new teachers, is because we want to keep the teachers who are coming in, because they made an investment for 4 years to go to college and to do this. So I want to retain those teachers. And I know as a new teacher and experienced teacher, I'm surrounded by a whole lot of teachers who are not doing what's best for students, who are focused on getting through the unit or the chapter and just teaching all the content. And when you're surrounded by all those other teachers who are not doing what's best for students, it causes harm. And then I know for me, it made me look at myself like, well, should I be doing what they're doing? And the answer is no. So just like students, when they're in school in the classroom and other people are doing things that are causing other people harm, it's the same way for us as adults, as teachers. We're surrounded by other adults and teachers that are causing harm and not doing what's best for students.
Well. Now, one thing that came to mind is the Hippocratic Oath. I think that's what it is for doctors. And they're supposed to do no harm. And you just made me think about that as we're wrapping this conversation up. Teachers, ask yourself, are the decisions that you're making every day in your classroom ones that are going to maximize student outcomes? And as you're thinking about the answer to that question, it can't be just centered on content. You have to think about those individual students in your classroom. So are you taking into consideration little Johnny, little Becky, like all the students that are in there? Do you have those relationships? Because if you don't have those relationships, that's why your engagement is low. Yeah. And your engagement is low, then I know you don't have no achievement. Okay, so we have already set that up. So again, we got to take our teacher oath to not do any harm either. We doing no harm.
Yes.
So if you feel like you are, then again, I want you to listen to those things that Dr. Lamb has laid out for you. She shared some things with you guys for a way that you can kind of set yourself up for success. And those are the ways that you can prevent yourself from doing harm. Thank you so much for joining me tonight and sharing your insights. I know our listeners are walking away with some powerful strategies, some powerful thoughts. I know I am. And for everyone tuning in, don't forget to subscribe and share this episode with your fellow educators. I am going to include in the show notes contact information for Dr. Lamb so that you can connect with her and finding her a comrade, a pal, a mentor, a coach, so that we all can get better together. Until next time, let's keep making math happen.